Tonight, Kathleen Joy from Syracuse's Common Council joins us in studio, a look at the history of corruption in New York State and how the world has reacted to the Paris attacks. Let's get the conversation started. Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Max Darrow. Tonight's top story is stormwater management in Syracuse. Every year, the area gets about 38 inches of rain and more than 100 inches of snow. But is our infrastructure equipped to handle it? Talking Points correspondent Molly Smith tells us that stormwater management is becoming of increasing importance to local politicians.
It's a problem that dates back more than 20 years. For decades, excess stormwater has flooded the Syracuse sewage system, backing into what had once been known as the most polluted lake in America, Onondaga Lake. While the lake pollution prompted the county's Save the Rain initiative, little has been done in the meantime to combat stormwater runoff. Now, county officials have asked the Syracuse Common Council to take the next step in the process by setting firm guidelines for property developers to adhere to in new construction.
And joining us now is the counselor at the forefront of this effort, Councilor Kathleen Joy. Counselor, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, just before we get this conversation started, where does this runoff go? Give me a little bit of background.
Well, with our aging infrastructure, most of the rainwater, and today is a very good example of that. It's been raining, and where does all that water go? It goes into our combined sewer and rainwater overflow, and eventually goes into our sewer system, into the sewage treatment plant, and into Onondaga Lake. We're trying to stop that.
So by trying to stop it, what are you proposing? What's the plan of action?
Well, if there's new development that it would create a large disruption in the soil, if there's a new building, if there's a new parking lot, we're going to ask the builders to divert that rainwater into something else. Maybe they could put in a rain garden. Maybe they could put in a bioswale. Maybe they could not connect it into the old sewer system. Those are the kinds of things that we're asking be done.
So there's got to be a lot of responses. How are developers and even the mayor responding?
Well, we've got three different points of view, and we're trying to take all of that into consideration. One is the environmental issue about polluting Onondaga Lake and trying to prevent that from happening, because even though it's kind of yucky to say, what happens is the sewer gets overflowed and goes into Onondaga Lake. Well, we don't want to have that happen. We're spending much too much effort and energy into saving Onondaga Lake, so we don't want to continue to pollute it in that way. So we have the environmental perspective. We also have some developers who say it's going to cost us too much money. Well, really it's not. What we're trying to do is to spread out the cost of this infrastructure improvement across the board, not just to sewage ratepayers, but to the developers too. And then we have our municipal officers who say, I don't want to make this too burdensome. I don't want to have too many permits, too much oversight, because we do want to have economic development. So it's a balance.
So where does this issue then stand just among the councils?
Well, we have a piece of legislation that's been introduced. We've had a couple of meetings, public meetings, to hear what people have to say. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at City Hall, we're going to have a working meeting where we can roll up our sleeves, sharpen our pencils, and really get to the language in the document to come up with something that was workable for all three of those different perspectives.
Well, Councilor Joy, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Best of luck with your initiative.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And coming up after the break, we'll talk about corruption in the New York State government. Don't go anywhere. Talking Points will be right back.
They're coming. Places, everybody.
Light check. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Everything looks good on our end.
And lights.
Come alive with the forest. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Looks like it's done.
Don't let salmonella get funky with your chicken. On average, 1 in 6 Americans will get a foodborne illness this year. You can't see these microbes, but they might be there. So learn the right temperature to cook each type of meat. Keep your family safe at foodsafety.gov.
Albany has been plagued with corruption and scandals for many years, but is New York really the most corrupt state in the Union? Talking Points correspondent Elijah Shama is here to explain.
The conviction of former Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver and the ongoing trial of former Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos proved that corruption exists in Albany. In a recent report card of state corruption in America, New York State received a D-. While a D- is certainly failing, it's worth noting that the highest grade received by any state was a C by Alaska. Historically, New York has had roots in corruption, the most notable example of this being the Tammany Hall political machine in New York, which lasted from 1789 until 1973. Interestingly enough, the Democratic political domination that occurred in Tammany Hall is referenced by many as one of the reasons for the culture of corruption that currently permeates Albany. Other reasons for this culture are the insular decision-making process in which many decisions involved only the governor, assembly speaker, and Senate majority leader. In addition to that, the majority of corruption allegations stem from campaign finance violations. To give you an idea of the massive scope of this problem, the NYPRG released a study showing that there had been over 100,000 violations of campaign finance law in the state. The simple answer suggests that New York is corrupt. However, it's yet to be seen whether New York is more corrupt than other states or just gets caught more often.
Thanks, Elijah. Moving forward, dozens of U.S. cities in 2016 can expect to see voter referendums and legislation on taxes regarding soda, an attempt by public health advocates to fight obesity. Here with what you need to know is Talking Points correspondent Gilat Melamed. Gilat, thanks so much for being with me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So, what is the soda tax?
So the soda tax is a 1-cent charge for every ounce of soda in a bottle. So this means that your standard liter of soda, which is about 33 ounces, will cost 33 cents more than before to discourage people from consuming soda.
So this is a relatively new debate. Can you tell me a little bit more about both sides?
Yeah, so basically the people who are really pro soda tax are public health advocates, and they say that by hiking up the price of soda, it will discourage people from buying soda. And this actually, a study was conducted in regards to this, and the study took place over 20 years, and what they found was that soda increased by 10%. When the cost increased by 10%, the person consumed 7.12% fewer calories, so it did help. However, there are health experts who disagree with this and say cutting back soda is not the answer. What we need is more exercise. So it's very two-sided.
So moving to the 2016 election, does this have a place? Is this going to be a big debate coming up?
It does have a place in the 2016 election because any city that has a soda tax measure on the ballot, this is likely to work in the Republicans' favor because generally liberal politicians are the ones who support this, and generally people are not in favor of taxes, especially taxes that try to influence how they live their lifestyle. So it's very easy for the Republicans to say, hey, look, we don't want to tell you what you should and shouldn't drink, and more importantly, we don't want to charge you any more money. So it can definitely help them.
So do you think this will be a polarized debate, a polarized issue in the 2016 election, or is it going to be non-party specific?
I think it will be party specific because basically, Berkeley, California was the first city to implement this, and it's a very liberal city, and conservatives are very against this. However, it's not a huge national issue yet, so it might not be as big of an issue as a lot of other things, but it will be polarized.
All right, Gilad, thanks so much. Talking Points correspondent Zina Saifi joins me now to talk about the recent protests in Chicago and what impact they had on the people of Chicago as well as the entire country. Zina, thanks. Thank you. So, what was it about the Laquan McDonald incident that sparked protests a full year after it happened?
Well, that's what it is. The fact that the video was released a year after the incident occurred, it really upset a lot of the people. And not to mention, in the video itself, you see McDonald not posing any apparent threat, and yet he was shot 16 times by the police officer. So that's why the protests took place.
So the city of Chicago is handling this in a very different way than a lot of the other cities. Can you tell me more?
I think, well, one of the reasons that a lot of the officials said why originally the video wasn't released when the incident happened was because they were afraid it was going to turn into another Ferguson, Missouri, or any of the other cities. So I think that was one of the reasons why they handled it differently and more peacefully. Originally, it was really civil, and they were even blocking some of the streets to allow the protesters to have their way. But then some talk was going on about that they wanted to purposely block the Black Friday event and not let people get into the stores. So the police were saying that, okay, that's violent, and a lot of the protesters had weapons, so they started arresting people. Even there was a threat that someone made on social media saying that he wanted to avenge the lives of all of these black teenagers who were killed by killing a lot of white men. So that's when things sort of started to get out of hand. Not in the sense that there was any violence, but just that a lot of people were taken into custody.
So the police took people into custody based on social media threats?
Yes.
Okay. And then looking at the bigger picture, how did the Chicago protests and just all of the other ones in the past couple of years tie together?
A lot of people, when a lot of these incidents were happening in certain cities, they were saying that this is just specific to Ferguson, this is just specific to New York. But what people that started the Black Lives Matter movement, they started saying that this is something that's an issue across the United States, that there is a flaw in the policing, in the whole police department of the United States, that there's discrimination. So they were kind of telling everyone to just rise up and see and draw attention to the fact that there is an issue and that people need to do something about it. So that's why in Chicago, the Attorney General of Illinois was calling for the U.S. Attorney General to have an investigation within the police department of Chicago to see if there's actually discrimination taking place, or is it just specific to certain cities. But that's why everyone after the Chicago incident, which was very similar to the other ones in the sense that someone who was a black teenager was slayed by one of the police officers, it was different in the sense that it was handled differently, and they're now starting to see the bigger picture that, okay, this is an issue across all of these different cities.
Well, Zina, thank you so much. And coming up right after the break, the latest news on the international response to the Paris terrorist attacks. Stay with us.
Pretty much a good day for me would be people leaving their hands off of me. I'm always called names. Everywhere that I go, there's always someone calling me names, calling me gay. I've been choked, thrown up against a wall, punched. Nobody's ever tried to help me.
Don't look at me. Your hair's a bit frizzy today. Oh, you should pick that up. Oh, you're such a dork. Loser. Here, let me help you with that. Oops.
Every day, kids witness bullying.
Oh, look. Your crush is looking at you. Poor you.
They want to help, but don't know how.
See, no one here's gonna help you, because no one
Teach your
likes you.
kids how to be more than a bystander. Visit stopbullying.gov.
The United States Supreme Court is considering a case challenging Texas's abortion bill. Talking Points correspondent Shruti Marathe now joins us to discuss the history of the abortion debate.
The debate on abortion dates back to the 19th century. In 1821, Connecticut became the first state in the U.S. to institute abortion regulation. The next big bill to pass was the Comstock Act. The bill banned any information about abortion and birth control. In 1963, the Society for Human Abortion directly defied the Comstock Act. Members openly provided information about abortion and contraception to the public. 4 years later, abortion was labeled a felony in 49 out of the 50 states. Although regulation was tough, individuals still attempted to get and give the procedure. The same year it was labeled a felony, Dr. Leon Bellis was convicted for referring a woman to an illegal abortion doctor. His trial led to the California Supreme Court decision in favor of the right to an abortion. Shortly afterwards, portions of the Comstock Act dealing with abortions and contraception were repealed. That brings us to the landmark case Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court decision struck down all state laws that made abortion illegal. After the opinion of the court was announced, debate between pro-life and pro-choice individuals still raged. 2 decades later, the decision, Jane Roe in Roe v. Wade, declared herself pro-life. She publicly announced, "I think it's safe to say that the entire abortion industry is based on a lie. I am dedicated to spending the rest of my life undoing the law that bears my name." Fast forward to today. The current Supreme Court case rests on the verdict of Planned Parenthood v. Casey. That decision affirmed abortion legislation is unconstitutional if it causes an undue burden on the woman seeking an abortion. The verdict, therefore, will boil down to whether the measures of the Texas bill can cause a substantial obstacle on a woman's right to abort.
On November 13th, terrorist attacks by ISIS killed 130 people in Paris. Nearly 3 weeks later, the world continues to come to terms with the effects of this terror crisis. Talking Points correspondents Dan Prager and Johnny Oliver join us to talk about how the world is responding to these attacks. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Max.
So, Johnny, starting with you, since France, ISIS has been active on the internet putting out videos. Tell me about their online activity.
So just this week, a video surfaced of a member of ISIS executing, specifically beheading, what he said was a Russian spy. Russia has been active in the fight against ISIS, and they apparently do have spies in the ISIS network, as well as executing airstrikes on ISIS, on ISIS. So other stuff that ISIS has been doing since the attack, while it's not 100% clear that it was an ISIS plan, there was set to be a soccer match between Germany and Netherlands in Hanover, Germany, but it was called off because there was, quote, concrete evidence that someone wanted to set off an explosive inside the stadium. And there's now evidence that ISIS is looking towards the future in their plans. If their de facto base in Syria falls, they have plans to move their headquarters to Libya, which, interesting enough, is closer to Europe than Syria is.
So Dan, moving to you now, the American response to the refugee crisis has been all over the place. Some people are for welcoming refugees, others want nothing to do with them, for lack of a better phrase. I'm being just as frank as I can. Tell me a little bit more about what's going on with just the people's response.
Well, the American public is very, very split. There was a Washington Post poll that said 54% of Americans oppose letting refugees into the country. 52% of people do not trust that the government can properly vet these people. They say there's not enough information on Syrian databases to say whether or not these people truly are terrorists. Now, it's important to remember the vetting process is the most comprehensive we've ever had. It's a multi-step program. It goes from the UN Refugee Agency, 9 different US departments, and recently the House voted to add in an FBI screening and have the Director of National Intelligence need to sign off on every single refugee. Now, the process usually takes 18 to 24 months, but with these added things, and we'll see how those added things stand, as many representatives said they may have acted hastily. Now, we'll see if those stand, but it could take a lot longer than 2 years to let these people in.
So despite all of these comprehensive reforms and this serious vetting process, 31 governors have said they will not allow refugees in their states.
Yeah, 31 governors, 30 of which are Republican, did say that. Now, it's kind of an idle threat because they cannot refuse refugees. It's against the law. It's more of a symbolic gesture. However, a group in Texas is suing the United States government as a group of refugees is coming into Dallas, and they're trying to halt or stop entirely these refugees coming in. That'll play out this week, and we'll need to see how that goes. Now, a lot of the presidential candidates on the national level have been using strong rhetoric. Ben Carson, in a speech, compared these refugees to rabid dogs, although he's backed off on that. Donald Trump said that he would start a registry for refugees and maybe some other Muslims, and said he would start surveillance on some mosques. Other candidates like Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio have said that they are in favor of letting in refugees eventually, but they need to make sure that the vetting process is completely up to date and completely as comprehensive as they want it to be.
And if I may interject, France, interesting enough, is allowing Syrian refugees into their country.
So speaking of France, they're allowing refugees in after this terrorist attack, but there's a big crackdown on terrorism. So they're allowing refugees in, yet France is cracking down on terrorism and upping security measures. Tell me a little bit more about their just international, specifically, I guess, European crackdown on terrorism.
So immediately after the attack, the French president promised merciless war against ISIS. 2 days after the attack, French jet pilots were dropping bombs on ISIS in airstrikes. And France has joined a US-led coalition in sharing data and intelligence about ISIS in order to further the worldwide cause against them. And just 6 days ago, France and Russia also agreed to similar terms to share information. When you look at Belgium, where some people believe that that's where the attack was planned and where some attackers fled after the tragedy. They've regularly been on high alert, even when there was a period of time where the subway system in Brussels was shut down completely. If you look across Europe, British Parliament just last night voted to airstrike ISIS. It's the first time the Brits have gotten in on airstrikes, and it was a pretty resounding yes vote from Parliament, 397 to 223.
So moving forward then, how about the international climate being just very sensitive to terrorism?
Well, there's this widespread fear of terror that has definitely been heightened since the Paris attacks, but it's also leading to a world response. The international community is starting to agree that we need to take out ISIS. As Johnny was just saying, France is bombing Syria. The UK just agreed to bomb Syria. We're making agreements with Russia on how to fight them. So a lot of major superpowers and countries in the Middle East that are really greatly affected by this are all cracking down to affect ISIS. So while there is that fear of terror and there is a fear of refugees coming into these countries and terrorists infiltrating them to try and attack, there's also a widespread response from the international community to stop ISIS.
So moving back to just our American soil, 31 governors, as mentioned before, said they will not allow refugees into their states. Is this contributing to the rise in Islamophobia that the country is facing?
I think in some ways, yes. I think one of the biggest pieces of Islamophobia was that Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz on the national level said that Muslim refugees may be more dangerous and that we should give priority when screening these people to Christian refugees. Now, they were attacked in the media for this. Only 18% of the American public agrees with them. But it's becoming a big problem where we see people being completely afraid of refugees. There was a crisis before where somebody at a Trump rally said that we have a problem in this country and it's called Islam. But it's not just in the US, the international community as well. The Prime Minister of Slovakia gave a warning last week that Muslims are a threat to Europe and the world in general. So we'll have to see how this Islamophobia, how we can stop it, while at the same time combating these terrorists. We want a fair balance of how we can stop terrorism, but also stop this fear of a religion that really promotes peace and not this radical ideology.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for being with us tonight. We will be right back.
If you want to be a parent, it doesn't matter how you play, what you wear, how you dance, or even what direction life takes you. You just need to be there. You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care don't need perfection. They just need you.
So who's going to do what?
I'll pack the dead batteries.
Great.
I'll only put what I don't need into a duffel bag.
Perfect. That's totally unhelpful.
No problem.
Meanwhile, I will try to comfort everyone by speaking in a calm voice. And who is going to handle supplies?
I can forget to do a list for us.
Thanks, pal.
We couldn't be any less prepared. I'm proud of you guys.
Talk to your kids about who to call, where to meet, what to pack. Search Ready Kids at nyc.gov or call 311.
On November 24th, Turkey shot down a Russian plane on the Syria-Turkey border. Russian President Vladimir Putin called the act a, quote, stab in the back and responded with economic sanctions on Turkey. Here to tell us more about the international conflict is Talking Points correspondent Joshua Feinblatt. Joshua, thanks for being with us tonight.
No problem, Max.
So tell me just a little bit more in detail about what actually happened with Russia and Turkey, the problems they're having.
Well, to start off, Turkey and Russia are on opposite sides of the Syrian war. Russia backing President Assad and Turkey with the Syrian rebels. But to go off that, about a week ago, Turkey shot down a Russian plane, and Turkey claims that they shot it down and they gave warnings and they said that it was in their airspace, but Russia says that it stayed in Syrian airspace and shouldn't have been shot down. President Obama has backed Turkey, saying that they have the right to defend themselves.
So a situation like this has repercussions. There's got to be some very serious consequences.
Well, if you'll remember back to the Cold War, actually, the USA had a U-2 spy plane which was shot down and the pilot was captured. And this really heightened tensions in the Cold War between the USSR and the USA. And this is sort of a similar situation where tensions have just been heightened because of it. Turkey is allied with NATO, so that includes the likes of the USA, the United Kingdom, France, and many more big countries. And so this could cause tension in the climate talks that are actually going on currently in France.
So moving ahead, where is this conflict going?
Well, Russia's already implemented economic sanctions against Turkey. Turkey exports a lot of agricultural products, and it's already dropped 40%. But more importantly, Turkey's the second largest buyer of Russian natural gas. And while that is bad for Russia, where they're losing a lot of money selling their gas, it's even worse for Turkey because they need that natural gas, especially during wartime.
So what about towards the international community then? Because this climate of this region is very, very heated.
Yeah. This direct conflict, I don't think it's going to make anything huge, considering Russia and Turkey are already on opposite sides of the Syrian civil war. But we'll have to see if the sanctions continue, if they get worse, and for how long. But all I can say is that two large countries with a lot of allies and a conflict between them is never a good thing.
All right, well, thanks so much for being with us, Joshua Feinblatt, everybody. The road to 2016 continues. Donald Trump is ahead for the Republicans, and Hillary Clinton is ahead for the Democrats. Now, not anything new in the polls, but joining me now is Talking Points correspondent Alex Amico to discuss a few more elements of the race. Alex, good evening.
Thank you, Max.
So what kind of strategy are the candidates taking now about?
So obviously Iowa and New Hampshire are two, they draw a lot of attention from every candidate, the first caucus and the first primary in the race. Right now, well, the Republican Party in both of those states is very different. In Iowa, it's much more of the evangelical conservatives. In New Hampshire, it's much more of the establishment Republicans. So what you're seeing now is a lot of the candidates with less money, with less national notoriety, they're putting all their eggs in one basket. So you see John Kasich and Chris Christie are focusing a lot in New Hampshire. Christie has picked up a few very influential endorsements from New Hampshire newspapers, and people like Mike Huckabee and Rick Santorum are focusing more on Iowa. Historically, New Hampshire is a better predictor as far as who the Republican nominee is going to be. The last two Republican primaries, the Iowa caucuses, were won by Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee. So not necessarily the best predictor of the nominee, but it still draws a lot of attention and resources from candidates.
So Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio are emerging as the standard bearers, for lack of a better phrase, as these two types of Republican candidates, but they don't seem to be all that different.
Right, they're very similar in a lot of ways. They're both in their 40s, they're both one-term senators, and they're both of Cuban descent. One area where they differ is sort of how they've approached their job on the Hill. Rubio has made a pretty solid amount of friends, which is reflected in the fact that he has the second most endorsements next to Jeb Bush. Cruz, on the other hand, has come in sort of guns a-blazing and has alienated almost everyone on both sides of the aisle. He did, however, pick up one incredibly influential endorsement for Iowa from controversial conservative Iowa Congressman Steve King, which is big for him. But that's sort of their big thing, is Ted Cruz has more kept his narrative of an outside, not even a reformer, but just an outside fighter fighting against the establishment. And as a consequence, he hasn't really made a lot of friends in Washington, while Rubio has managed to cultivate more relationships.
So final, very quick, just where do they stand in the polls?
Tied nationally. Cruz is leading in Iowa, Rubio is leading in New Hampshire.
Alex Amico, thanks so much. We'll keep the situation monitored. That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in to Talking Points. I'm Max Darrow. Have a great night, Syracuse.